Recently, I went through Final Fantasy XVI for a second time in order to get the Platinum Trophy. My first playthrough of the game was right at release, and I really did love it. I had some gripes with it, like any game, and it wasn't my favorite Final Fantasy game ever, but it was an excellent attempt at a new gameplay system with one of the best stories in the franchise, as far as I'm concerned. After replaying it though, I do have some new thoughts on the game, and my opinions have kind of shifted since I first played it. So first off, getting the Platinum Trophy in this game really isn't that bad. It requires at least 2 playthroughs, one with the normal difficulty setting, and the other one with the Final Fantasy difficulty setting, which can only be unlocked after beating the game. For my second playthrough, I opted for a New Game Plus run on this difficulty mode, which allowed me to carry over my progress from my first run through, which also meant that I got to keep all of my ability unlocks. In addition to beating it on that difficulty mode, you also have to unlock all of the abilities in the game. This game uses AP, or ability points, to unlock all of the different abilities in the game. Unfortunately, there's not really enough AP to go around in your first playthrough, unless you decide to grind out basic enemies for a couple hours, so you're probably going to want to do another playthrough to get that trophy. Other than those 2 trophies, I had everything else unlocked. All the side quests complete, all the story missions finished, and all of the hunts conquered as well. Replaying the game with just those 2 trophies required allowed me to free up how I play quite a bit. This time around, I wasn't compelled to complete all of the side quests, and I can just focus on the story missions. I didn't feel obligated to do all of the hunts either, only some of them, just to kind of get those extra AP and the crafting materials as well. Because I played through the story, I can finally skip all of those boring cutscenes and missions that felt there just to kind of pad out the runtime, even when I first played it. Which brings me to some of my second playthrough notices. Now first off, I do want to say that I actually don't hate this game, not at all. I still think it's a great Final Fantasy, and I applaud it for doing something different with the gameplay and the overall tone. I know a lot of fans of the series wanted turn-based combat to return, or for them to go back to a more family-friendly tone like the originals, but to me, Final Fantasy is the most interesting when it does take risks. It's the reason why the games have been so popular over the years. That being said, the game has some serious issues for sure, and its issues are amplified during a second playthrough. So let's talk about the gameplay first, because it's the main draw to this game besides the story. When the game was first coming out, the initial trailers saw it to be more of an action-oriented game rather than a turn-based game, which excited me greatly. The previous entry, 15, was the game that got me into the franchise, and that was an action RPG focused game. I think that game has a lot of merit too, but it's bogged down with a lot of things. I really don't want to get into it right now because it could take up the whole video, but the action gameplay in that one was very unique and not very traditional, even for the world of action RPGs. What I wanted from 16 was something more akin to Kingdom Hearts, which is one of my favorite battle systems in any RPG. What I got though was something more akin to Devil May Cry, but maybe a little bit less complex. In 16, the gameplay is fun. I didn't really have any issue with it during either of my playthroughs. However, it doesn't reach the heights of any other action RPG that came before it. A lot of it is very shallow, with flashy animations to kind of cover all that up. I think a lot of the issues come from the hits not feeling all that satisfying, really. Compare the hit sound from Final Fantasy XVI to Kingdom Hearts.
Just stay calm.
Nice try. You're taking this seriously.
Kingdom Hearts feels weighty and punchy and just fun to hit things. In my opinion, Final Fantasy XVI lacks in that department. The sounds of your sword swings are just too thin, and they don't have a good punch to them. In an action game, good sound design is everything, but the default sword swings just aren't there for me. It doesn't help either that the sword does very little damage, even on the normal mode. But to be fair though, you're not really supposed to be using just your sword all the time. You're supposed to use your abilities. And yes, that is very true, and thankfully your abilities do sound much better. They are decently satisfying to use, especially Titan's parrying, but in between your cooldowns, you do have to use your sword, and that area does lack. But let's talk about the abilities now, because that's really what the main gameplay revolves around. You have 7 different icons that all have unique abilities attached to them. In total, there's about 50 abilities that you can use in your arsenal, but the catch is you can only use 6 in battle. This makes it so you have to carefully craft these loadouts that you think you can benefit the most from. For example, if you think you're going to encounter a bunch of standard enemies in a large room, you might want to equip some abilities that are good for that, like Ignition for example. Or if you can sense a boss fight coming up, you should probably equip abilities that are good for the stagger meter. As I said before, some of the abilities can be really fun to use. I love Rising Flame, Ignition, Gouge, and Raging Fist, and the icon abilities like Phoenix Shift, Deadly Embrace, and Titan's Block are super fun to use when you can use them correctly. Using all of the abilities in combination with each other in a fast and skillful way is actually kind of difficult, which I do like. Seeing other people play online that are really good is just so cool to see, so in that way I do like the combat system. I do think though that a majority of the abilities just aren't really that fun to use, like Bahamut's Wings of Light and Rama's Blind Justice. They just feel so slow to use that it just makes me never want to touch them, especially in a game that's just so fast paced. I really think the fun abilities in this game are mostly front loaded, meaning that you get many of the cooler abilities in the first half of the game. However, getting the Odin icon was really cool, but to be honest though, I really don't use most of his stuff. The Arm of Darkness is pretty sick though, I gotta be real. Another thing that disappointed me about the abilities in this game were that the elements that each icon is tied to don't matter at all. I was hoping to see enemies that have a certain element tied to them be more affected by an opposing element of the icon that I have equipped, but no. All the icons do the same against all enemies, which I find to be a very big miss. The presentation of this game is very interesting. On one hand, it's a fairly new, modern, big-budget Final Fantasy game exclusive to the fancy new PlayStation 5. On the other hand, there's really something about this game that makes it seem like a PS2 game, and let me just explain. So for starters, there's a lot of ideas that I think would be really cool to see added to the game, and some ideas that just seem really obvious, but that are just not here at all. So this is a pure action game, right? And so that means there are very little, if any at all, RPG mechanics here that are typically found on more traditional Final Fantasy games. This obviously turned a lot of JRPG fans off, but to be honest, I didn't really mind it that much. Considering that from the get-go, they were advertising this game as an action game and not an RPG, didn't make me think twice that there was barely any leveling up processes or any customizing your gear in any cool way or anything like that that would make it more of a typical RPG. In a way, I can kind of appreciate the fact that they really just wanted this game to be a straight-up action game, and that they didn't want to add any quote-unquote unnecessary mechanics to their overall vision. But on the other hand, I find that the game is a little dry without all that. Originally when I played it, I didn't mind it, and I even disagreed with the players that thought it was just sorely missing, but after playing through again though, I find that this game is pretty much just combat and story. There's not much progression here, other than upgrading your weapon and armor every so often to just get a slightly bigger number than the one before that, but that's really it. There's also no armor customization at all. There's no upgrading your armor and getting cool loot or anything like that. Not even dyeing your armor to see different colors. You're pretty much just stuck with what you got the entire game. There are also reigns, which can change the gameplay drastically and even adjust the difficulty level in some ways. For example, you can equip the Reign of Timely Focus, which allows you to dodge easier by getting a very brief QuickTime event every time an enemy is about to attack you. There are other necklaces too, which can help with damage boosting or cooldown times of certain abilities, but I never really used them all that much. For the most part, during my second playthrough, I equipped the Reign that gives you extra AP, the Timely Focus Reign, and the one that makes it so Torgal can automatically attack. All that being said though, the fact that there's very little variety in the gameplay, very little to no customization, and basically no real progression system, all make it sound like, to me, an early PS2 action game in some way. Something that's pretty fun for a few hours, maybe like 10 or so, and you just kind of put it away after that. The thing though is that Final Fantasy XVI is 35 hours, so the combat has to be innovative and fun and exciting for all of those 35 hours, otherwise you're gonna get bored. However, here though, they made a really great compelling story that makes you want to keep pushing through in order to see the ending. I think the balance here for the game is a bit off overall though. The gameplay I don't think reaches the same level as the story, and so it can feel a little bit of a slog to get through sometimes. Speaking of slog, there are side quests in this game, and they're generally pretty poor. What I think happened is they took a lot of the quest design from 14 and implemented it here, and as someone who plays 14, the quest design was one thing that they should not have put forward in this game. Pretty much all of the quests in this game involve you going around talking to people and maybe ending it with some sort of a combat encounter. And that's pretty much it. There's not a lot of cool rewards that you can get or interesting gear or anything like that. It's pretty much just there for the XP, the AP, the money, and the stories. Now, the story of these quests are mostly interesting though. I will give them that. Some of them go into a lot more detail about how people live their lives in the world or just giving some more backstory. One of the side quests involving Torgal was really touching and sweet. Those moments are where 16 can really shine, the character interactions. Other than that though, the side quests are just mostly padding from my view, and especially going through some of them again, I either just skipped the dialogue or didn't even bother to complete them. I did them all once before, and I didn't feel the need to do them again. After all this, you may think I hate the game, but I actually don't. In a way, I can respect the studio for making the game they wanted to make, faults and all. I have a lot less contempt for this game than I do for 15, which has annoyed me with how many wonderful ideas they use, but fail in the execution of them. 16, however, seems like it was the game that it was always meant to be, which is very commendable. It felt like this game was way better managed too compared to previous entries, which might be due to producer Yoshi P, who famously fixed up 14 from total failure back in 2013. 16 has a lot of great qualities to it, even upon a second playthrough. I still love the boss fights. They are genuinely some of the best boss fights in gaming in my opinion. They are just absolutely incredible. I love the music, I love the visuals, I love the story and the characters. Clive may just be one of my favorite Final Fantasy protagonists. He is just so cool, and his story is just so awesome to play through. And for as much as I complain about the combat, I still kind of like it. Yes, it does have its issues, but I mean, it's still pretty fun all things considered. Using the abilities is still really cool, and the progression system of unlocking new abilities with AP isn't really, much to go off of, but it's still engaging enough for me to keep going through, at least on regular New Game. With all that being said though, I do think my original score of an 8 out of 10 for this game might be going down to a 7 out of 10. Which is more like a 3.5 rather than a 4 out of 5. Final Fantasy XVI is still a great game, but one that has some flaws. But whether or not you'll care about them is all about personal preference.